Good morning, everyone. Before I begin, I think just to put everything in context, although we have important issues facing the country, I know all of us remain focused on our desire to see peace in Ukraine. And I think even in the midst of the challenges we're going through, we are still very blessed to live in Canada, and our hearts and our focus is on the people in Ukraine and what they're going through. We were planning this morning to come and to announce to Canadians some good news that the Conservatives are going to be presenting a motion this morning, and we'll be debating it today, that would see Canadians save a little bit of money at the pumps. We were hoping we could get agreement with the other parties and that we could see a reduction in taxes, just even a temporary GST and tax holiday for Canadians, and we were looking forward to getting some support on that. And we will be talking more about that shortly. My colleagues will be speaking about that. But something broke last night, and it was obviously something very important. We found out last night that the NDP and the Liberals were meeting secretly, and they've cooked up a backroom deal that would see Justin Trudeau get the majority power that he tried desperately to get last fall in the last election, but he failed to get. This deal means that Canadians have woken up to, in essence, an NDP Liberal majority government. And I think we have to let that sink in. This is an NDP Liberal government, and they have the majority. 82% of voters did not vote for a Liberal NDP government, including millions of Liberal voters. These Canadians woke up this morning to the fact that they have been hoodwinked and they've been deceived by their Prime Minister. Now, let me be clear, this is nothing more than a Justin Trudeau power grab. He is desperately clinging to power. His number one goal, as we have seen over the course of the last 6 years, is always to do what's best for him, not to do what's best for Canadians. Now, make no mistake, the NDP are in charge. What does this mean? Well, it means the decimation of Canadian oil and gas and LNG, which we know this more than ever. That means that is really a way to prop up Putin and Russia. When the NDP Liberal government phase out, which means destroy Canadian oil, gas, and LNG, they are helping Russia. And that was one of the top priorities they had, and that Justin Trudeau has agreed to. It means mining, agriculture, fisheries are all next under the extreme policies of the NDP, which are now Liberal policies. It also means $214 billion, just that we know of, in new spending for Canadians. And that's who's going to be spending. That's who's going to be bearing the brunt of the new NDP Liberal government. All of which for Canadians means more debt, more inflation, more jobs lost, more uncertainty, and frankly, more polarization. This is not a good day for Canadians. I'm here to say that we, Conservatives, are still conservative. We have not changed. We are still here to fight for Canadians. And Canadians can count on Conservatives to be consistently conservative. We are the party of less government spending. We are the party of low taxes. We are champions of Canadian natural resources. We are champions for Canadian farmers, for Canadian small businesses, for Canadian workers. We are champions for Canadian families. We are champions for Canadian taxpayers. And we are here to help Canadians save money. Canadians, millions of Canadians this morning, I think, are in need of hope. Canadians are waking up to this NDP Liberal government. They are, many of them, in shock. There is, I'm sure, a lot of despair in the West right now around this decision. And so we are going to spend the next little while reaching out to millions of Canadians, including those who have not voted Conservative, to let them know that we will continue to be their voice here in Ottawa. And we will do everything we can to hold this NDP Liberal government to account, including speaking directly to Liberal MPs who I'm sure did not tell their constituents that they would now be part of an NDP Liberal government. So with that, I'm going to ask my colleagues Ed Fast, Dan Albas, and Gérard Deltell to come and talk a little bit about our Opposition Day motion, and then we're happy to take questions. Merci.
Well, thank you very much, Candice, for your remarks. My colleagues and I are going to very briefly address the Conservative Opposition Day motion, which has been brought forward today. Skyrocketing inflation and the cost of living crisis are devastating families across Canada. In fact, 53% of Canadians say they can't keep up with rising prices. I've been hearing that from my constituents in Abbotsford and from people across our country who are begging for relief. Today, Conservatives are calling on the government to pause the GST on fuel to give Canadians a break. This would immediately provide relief at the pumps to all Canadians, reducing prices by about 8 cents per litre. Actually, out our way in Vancouver area, it's probably closer to 10 cents a litre. These are Canadians who rely on their vehicles to get to work, drive their kids to hockey practice and to school. These are small businesses and their non-profits who depend on their vehicles to keep serving their community. So giving Canadians a GST break on fuel is a simple, common sense solution to help the Canadians who are suffering the most from inflation. Families, workers, and business owners can't afford more hollow words and empty promises from Justin Trudeau. Inflation is a serious challenge that requires a serious response. They need real action to help Canadians make ends meet. So we Conservatives will always be the voice of Canadians looking for relief from the spiraling cost of living. We hope the government will join us in those efforts. Now I'll turn the lectern over to my colleague Dan Albas.
Thank you, Ed, and good morning, Leader. Good morning, colleagues, everyone. Hope you're all well. Inflation is causing real damage to the finances of Canadians. Here's the reality. Inflation is at the highest rate in a generation, and compared to last year is costing Canadians an additional 5.7% on everything. Wages aren't keeping up. Housing prices alone have doubled under Justin Trudeau and have climbed 29% in the last year alone. Groceries are going to cost the average family at least an extra $1,000 this year, and there are real costs. These are the real costs of Justin Trudeau's economic failures. Now, in my home province of British Columbia, gas prices have been as high as $2 a litre. Millions of Canadians have no choice but to use their cars to drive to work, to pick up their groceries, to pick up their children, get them to sports and other activities. It's families and small businesses that are hurting the most. So far, this Prime Minister has only made excuses. He's done nothing to help tangibly reduce the inflation crisis that Canadians are suffering. And it's time for Justin Trudeau's government to finally step up for Canadians. Temporarily removing the GST from fuel is a simple, common sense solution that can make a real difference and leave money where it belongs, in the pockets of hardworking Canadians. Conservatives will be fighting for families right across this great country that have been pushed to the brink because of the cost of living crisis that we are seeing today. Thank you. I'll ask my colleague Gérard Deltell to come to the podium.
Bon matin, chef, chers collègues, mesdames, messieurs. L'enjeu qui touche toutes les familles canadiennes, c'est l'inflation. Aujourd'hui, à la Chambre des communes, les conservateurs ont déposé une motion pour donner de l'oxygène aux familles canadiennes avec un peu de répit sur les taxes sur le carbone, sur la taxe de la TPS sur le pétrole. Mais voilà qu'une mauvaise nouvelle frappe les Canadiens ce matin. Plutôt que de parler de lutte à l'inflation, nous allons parler d'augmentation de l'inflation. Puisque cette entente secrète qui a été négociée hier entre le NPD et le Parti libéral fait en sorte que ce matin, le gouvernement NPD libéral va diriger le Canada. Les Canadiens doivent donc s'attendre à des augmentations de taxes, à plus de déficit, à plus de dépenses, qui va faire en sorte que l'inflation va augmenter en raison de ces politiques-là. 82% des électeurs canadiens n'ont pas voté pour un gouvernement dirigé par le NPD. Mais c'est ce à quoi on est confronté aujourd'hui. M. Trudeau a donné carte blanche au NPD puisqu'il s'est associé à lui directement. Mais il ne faut pas se méprendre de cette situation-là. M. Trudeau a d'abord et avant tout pensé, encore une fois, à sa fierté personnelle. M. Trudeau veut rester premier ministre pendant 10 ans. La seule solution qu'il a trouvée pour ça, parce qu'il sait très bien que les Canadiens n'en veulent plus et que même dans son parti, il y a des gens qui commencent à en avoir assez, voilà qu'il a conclu une entente avec le NPD qui va faire en sorte que le Canada est maintenant gouverné par un gouvernement NPD et libéral, ce qui assure, semble-t-il, à M. Trudeau le fait qu'il va entrer dans l'histoire comme étant un premier ministre de 10 ans. Encore une fois, sa fierté personnelle devant les intérêts des Canadiens. Alors, nous allons suivre évidemment très attentivement ce qui se passe. Nous allons continuer à se battre pour les Canadiens, pour les familles canadiennes. Au cours des 2 dernières semaines, dans ma circonscription, j'ai rencontré des centaines de citoyens, des gens qui en ont assez de l'inflation et qui demandent un répit et qui demandent de l'oxygène. Et c'est pourquoi aujourd'hui, nous les conservateurs, allons débattre d'une motion qui permettrait aux Canadiens d'en avoir un peu plus dans leur poche. Cette motion vise à suspendre temporairement la TPS sur le pétrole qu'ils payent lorsqu'ils vont faire le plein d'essence. C'est une mesure concrète, facile et adaptable pour tout le monde qui va toucher toutes les familles canadiennes. Mais malheureusement, le gouvernement NPD et libéral va fort probablement voter contre. Nous verrons bien comment cela va se passer. Mais sachez une chose, nous les conservateurs serons toujours là pour les familles canadiennes qui en arrachent dans cette période inflationniste. Merci.
Passons maintenant aux
Yeah,
questions.
we'll take, if your questions are in French, we'll, Gérard, do you want to?
Si. Bonjour, Laurence Martin de Radio-Canada. Est-ce que vous estimez, M. Deltell, que cette entente est antidémocratique?
Bon, on est en train de regarder ça attentivement. Nos gens qui sont des spécialistes en matière de travail parlementaire sont en train de regarder ça. Ce que l'on sait aussi, c'est qu'il y a des gouvernements minoritaires qui ont très bien fonctionné avec des ententes qui avaient cours sur chacun des projets de loi, des mesures qui sont proposées. Notre parti a dirigé le Canada avec 2 gouvernements minoritaires et à ce que je sache, le Canada s'est très bien porté.
Est-ce qu'à partir de maintenant, vous excluez la possibilité de collaborer avec le gouvernement Trudeau sur des projets de loi précis?
Bien, c'est toujours projet de loi par projet de loi. Nous, ce qui nous intéresse, c'est l'intérêt des Canadiens. Est-ce que les intérêts des Canadiens sont bien desservis sur tel projet de loi ou sur tel autre projet de loi? Alors, on va le faire notre travail comme on fait depuis toujours, c'est-à-dire point par point, on va l'analyser. Mais ce qu'on voit aujourd'hui, c'est quoi? C'est que le gouvernement NPD libéral fait en sorte que maintenant, les deux sont attachés main dans la main. C'est un gouvernement NPD libéral qui va augmenter les taxes, qui va augmenter les dépenses, qui va augmenter les déficits et qui va augmenter la dette. Les Canadiens méritent beaucoup mieux que ça.
Bonjour, M. Deltell. Si vous pouvez rester au micro, j'ai une question en français. Votre parti s'est beaucoup plaint lors de la dernière campagne électorale à l'effet que la campagne était inutile, coûteuse pour rien. M. Trudeau nous présente ça ce matin comme la stabilité. Est-ce qu'il n'y a pas beaucoup de Canadiens qui risquent de voir une vertu dans ça, de la stabilité jusqu'en 2025, pas d'élection?
Comment peut-on croire que cet homme-là, M. Trudeau, fait ça pour la stabilité alors qu'il a déclenché une élection en pleine pandémie? C'est exactement le contraire qu'il fait actuellement. Comme il se rend compte qu'au moment où on se parle, il n'est plus capable de gouverner comme lui le désire, parce qu'il a malheureusement pour lui, peut-être heureusement pour le Canada, il est minoritaire. Mais voilà que le résultat, c'est quoi? Le résultat, c'est qu'il fait une entente avec le NPD qui fait en sorte que maintenant, c'est le NPD libéral qui mène le gouvernement. C'est ça la réalité. Il a donné carte blanche au NPD avec ça. Mais comment faire confiance à cet homme qui nous parle de stabilité alors qu'il a déclenché une campagne électorale en pleine pandémie, alors que personne n'en voulait? Encore une fois, M. Trudeau montre son visage dans son hypocrisie la plus laide.
Faire devant ça?
Bien, comme je vous disais tout à l'heure, nous allons analyser les impacts parlementaires par rapport à ça. Mais c'est sûr et certain que nous, on va continuer à se battre pour les Canadiens. Nous, on va continuer à se battre pour baisser les taxes pour les Canadiens, comme on veut le faire aujourd'hui avec notre motion. Et on souhaite, on peut toujours rêver, mais on souhaite que le gouvernement nous donne d'accord là-dessus, mais je ne cacherai pas un deux là-dessus.
Hi, Ms. Bergen, Stephanie Taylor with the Canadian Press. Conservatives are going to have some opportunities, I suppose, to work with the Liberals if they want over the next 4 years. Do Conservatives support the new dental care program this deal is going to be getting Canadians starting with kids 12 and under?
The NDP Liberal government, which are now telling Canadians this morning, are going to be introducing a national dental program is something that is going to cost Canadians billions of dollars. Many Canadians already have insurance that their private insurance they're paying for with their employer and have dental coverage. Canadians did not vote for a national dental program, and they certainly did not vote for an NDP Liberal government. So I would tell you that Conservatives will consistently stand up for the taxpayer. We will consistently stand up for good policy that actually provides Canadians with the best options when it comes to dental coverage, pharmacare coverage. We think there certainly are Canadians that need help, and provinces are providing help, and we'd like to see Canadians who are lower income and need that kind of assistance have that assistance. But that was not what Canadians voted for just a few short months ago. They did not vote for an NDP Liberal government that would be spending billions of dollars in new spending.
Do you believe Conservatives are going to be fighting Justin Trudeau as the Liberal leader come the next election?
I have no idea. That will be up to Justin Trudeau to answer. I do know this: we are fighting an NDP Liberal majority government right now.
Ms. Bergen, David Baxter with Global News. You mentioned trying to reach out to some Liberals who you feel may be unsatisfied with this. Would you be starting with some of the Liberal MPs who stood against the imposition of the Emergencies Act?
I think we'll see. I mean, this is new. We'll have to see how some of these Liberals respond to questions that we pose, questions that their own constituents will have. But I cannot imagine that all Liberals are comfortable with this. There are many Liberals that are, fiscally responsible. There are obviously many millions of Liberal voters, I believe, who are fiscally responsible, that support Canadian natural resources, that support Canadian having investment grow in Canada. There are a lot of Liberals that are coming to me and saying they're very worried about the economic direction under a Justin Trudeau government. I cannot imagine this morning how they are feeling knowing that we now have a Jagmeet Singh led, because he's basically going to be the Deputy Prime Minister. This is a formal written agreement. We now have a NDP Liberal government in charge. So I am fairly certain there are literally millions of Liberal voters, including some Liberal members of Parliament, who have got to be very concerned this morning.
And now, looking at the past election result, approximately 50% of the vote went either the Liberals or the NDP. We see these partnerships show up in other countries where we do have multiple parties making up parliaments. Last time we saw an agreement like this in Canada was within the BC provincial government. There it still seemed like the NDP were very much driving the ship there. What indication is there beyond just like this initial announcement that Jagmeet Singh is going to play such a pivotal role in the future direction over the next 4 years?
I think the announcement we heard this morning is very clear. Justin Trudeau has basically said what I told Canadians I would do 3, 4, 5 months ago in the election. I've changed my mind because I actually want to feel and know that I have a majority power. And so I will do basically anything the NDP asks me to do in order to keep that power. I think that is proof enough. And I mean, we already have seen Trudeau in his policy move further and further to the left. This is a man who wasn't joking when he said he doesn't think about monetary policy. This is a man that was not joking when he says he admires China's basic dictatorship. He admires very left, very extreme ways of governing and governance. And so when he has now formed a formal agreement with the NDP government, with the NDP party, who is now basically the government, he has deceived Canadians. And I think there's got to be a lot of concern, not just with Canadians, but with Liberal voters themselves. What lengths will this man go to cling to power?
Bonjour, Boris Proulx du Devoir. Ma question est principalement pour M. Deltell, though if you want to add something after, that could be great.
Okay.
Ma question est peut-être pour vous d'abord. On a entendu François Legault, le premier ministre du Québec, parler des partis centralisateurs lors de la dernière élection fédérale. J'aimerais savoir, selon vous, quelles conséquences ça va avoir pour les Québécois, cette entente-là avec le NPD aujourd'hui?
Mais c'est sûr que vous avez une alliance assez forte de partis centralisateurs. Le NPD, dans sa nature même, est centralisateur. C'est la preuve même du socialisme. Le socialisme vise à tout concentrer les pouvoirs dans l'État. Alors, c'est clair qu'avec l'entente du NPD libéral que l'on a maintenant comme gouvernement, c'est clair que ça va être un gouvernement encore plus centralisateur, encore plus dépensier et qui va davantage chercher l'argent dans les poches du monde, qui va faire des déficits, qui va agrandir la dette et qui va créer de nouvelles taxes. Oubliez le fait que des taxes peuvent baisser, que des taxes taxes peuvent être annulées pour donner de l'oxygène aux familles canadiennes, comme on le souhaite aujourd'hui. C'est clair que maintenant, avec le gouvernement NPD libéral, les Canadiens, les Québécois doivent s'attendre à un gouvernement plus centralisateur et plus dépensier.
I don't know if
Did you want to repeat it in English, please?
No, just if you want to add something about that, but perhaps just on fiscal responsibility, if you just want to have comment on the deficit or the fiscal forecast that is ahead with this deal. What's your take on that?
We're as conservatives, we are very, very concerned with the deficit and the fact that now having an NDP Liberal government means the deficit will be even more out of control than it is. I think Canadians and Canadian businesses, Canadian job creators, Canadian families have to be looking at this and recognizing inflation. There is no hope of inflation getting under control. I know we had hoped as Conservatives we could encourage the Liberal government to maybe step back from their increased taxation that was going to happen on April 1st, even the increased carbon tax. We know that there's some beliefs around the carbon tax helping the environment. We have questions around that, but we at this point had hoped that maybe we could encourage yesterday's Liberal government to reduce taxes for Canadians. Now that we have an NDP Liberal government, I would say there is no hope of reduced taxes. There is no hope of seeing any control of the spending. It is, I think, a very dire situation for Canadians.
Last question, dernière question.
Madame Bergen, are we seeing a movie that we've seen in the past? 1972, Pierre Trudeau also had a deal with the NDP for 2 years to maintain in power, and Mr. Trudeau is doing the same thing with the NDP. Is this back to the future?
Yeah, I think so. I was thinking even more of the coalition in Ontario and the NDP Liberal coalition and what happened to Ontario and the disaster that was. So we haven't seen quite as formal a signed agreement. I think this is very new and certainly new in recent history. So, the concerning part is we asked questions. Our former leader, Aaron O'Toole, was very clear saying there's going to be a coalition, and you will recall he was mocked and laughed at, and it will never happen. We've woken up this morning, we went to bed last night knowing this not only was possibly happening this morning, we've heard the announcement, we saw the Prime Minister stand up and say that they've been talking, they've had secret deals they weren't telling anyone about. No one knew they were doing this. In the midst of, we've got a war going on in Ukraine, we had the Emergencies Measures Act that was declared, backed by the NDP. One has to wonder, when did these talks start? What kind of agreements were made? What was the quid pro quo that was given? These are important questions that go to the very heart of our democracy. Democracy and openness has been replaced by backroom deals. And so this is certainly about fiscal challenges and the fear of what this will do to the economy of the country. But I believe it goes to the heart of our democracy. The Liberals and the NDP had and have an obligation to be honest and transparent and tell Canadians this is what they've been cooking up. And they didn't do that. They cannot be trusted. These parties cannot be trusted. Neither of these men can be trusted to do what's best for the country. So a lot of implications. We have a lot of work to do, and we're going to get to work doing that. Thanks very much.
Pour Monsieur Deltell, juste en terminant. Vous avez parlé des tendances centralisatrices du NPD et du Parti libéral. Est-ce qu'il y a plus d'affrontements entre Québec et Ottawa à la lumière de cette entente formelle entre M. Singh et M. Trudeau, qui préconisent quand même des programmes dans les compétences des provinces, par exemple?
C'est évident que le gouvernement NPD libéral est une mauvaise nouvelle pour les contribuables canadiens, mais c'est une très mauvaise nouvelle aussi pour les premiers ministres provinciaux, parce que c'est dans la nature même du NPD de s'ingérer dans les champs de compétences provinciales. Maintenant qu'on a un gouvernement NPD libéral, les provinces vont se sentir plus redevables à ce qui se passe à Ottawa. Alors, est-ce que les Canadiens ont besoin de plus d'impôts, plus de taxes, plus de déficit et plus de dettes? Non. Est-ce que les provinces ont besoin de nouvelles chicanes avec Ottawa? Pas du tout. Mais avec le gouvernement NPD libéral, malheureusement, c'est ce qui se dessine.
Merci.
Sur le temps mouillage, c'est tout le temps que nous avons.